The views and opinions expressed in this podcast do not necessarily reflect the views or positions of Acuma, its board of directors, its management staff, or its members. The podcast discussion presented is conversational in nature and for general information only.
Hello, and welcome to Acuma's On Point Podcast, the policy series, where we focus on policy issues impacting the credit union mortgage industry. I'm your host, Peter Benjamin. Today's episode is being brought to you by LenderPrice, the most modern and proven product and pricing engine in lending. Whether it's enhancing the pricing experience or efficiently matching home buyers with the ideal loan program, LenderPrice empowers all credit unions to excel and innovate in today's dynamic market. Their cost-effective pricing engine provides modern APIs that deliver seamless integrations, full product and rate support, custom workflows, and it's simple and easy to use for loan originators. LenderPrice is proud to sponsor the Acuma On Point Podcast policy series, where discussions on the policy issues impacting credit union mortgage lenders take center stage. Get to know LenderPrice and book a demo at www.lenderprice.com. Joining us today as our resident experts, we are fortunate enough to have both Leah Dempsey, shareholder, and Zach Pfister, policy director with Brownstein. Leah and Zach, how are you both doing today? No, don't jump out at once. Come on, guys. How are you guys doing?
I was going to let Zach go because I got in last night, almost at 11 p.m. from California. Although it was beautiful out in Palm Springs, but I bet Zach's probably feeling a little more energized than me. So.
No, I like it. Zach, how you doing?
Doing well, Peter. Glad to be back.
I love it. All right. So here we are. This is going to be, they're all special. All of our policy episodes are special, but this one's going to be especially special because it is officially the last episode before the election. And so we're really going to focus on that. And that's why you're both here. So let's start diving into the election and really, as our listeners start heading into November and, start thinking about housing heading into November, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but all the debates are done. The only presidential debate is done. The only vice president debate is done. So focusing on housing, what do our listeners need to think about as they start heading into the polls or heading into the ballot boxes just to cast their votes when thinking about housing? So we'll start with Leah. We'll let you go first. I know you're tired, but still, you're going first.
Thank you guys for having me. And a few weeks are left, and everyone is looking forward to their text messages stopping. And
I've gotten two today.
Yeah, I get. I will say I'm the Republican on the podcast, but I'm very much up in the air about Ted Cruz at this point because I get about 4 phone calls from him every day and about 10 text messages, which is a little bit ironic because he, if the Republicans take the Senate, is going to be the chair of the Senate Commerce Committee, which oversees robocalls, but he certainly likes to make robocalls. No, in all seriousness, right now, I mean, a lot of people have actually already voted. A lot of states have early voting. So there are many housing issues that have been discussed over the past several months as we've broken down here, and certainly many that came up in the most recent vice presidential debate. But at this point, between now and the election, particularly from the agencies, I don't think we're going to see any other major surprise rulemakings. I think at this point they're focused on pushing out maybe guidance or smaller ticket items that are on their to-do list. But some of their major rulemakings and major initiatives that both sides hung their hats on, I think are done for the most part. But I'll let Zach jump in to see if he agrees with that or has any other thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I tend to agree. If you look back on the debates, and I agree, Peter, that they're done. The themes have fallen a bit along traditional lines, right? Harris has proposed tax credits for first-time home buyers. Trump has, danced around, cutting red tape and regulatory burden, and even tied in, restrictions on the immigrant population from accessing mortgages as a way to increase supply. I think that we discussed this a little bit at the ACUMA conference in Vegas as well, where we're certainly in the promise everything season of the election stretch here, where proposals are floating around that are from a feasibility standpoint a bit complicated, some unrealistic, many focusing on the affordability side, but maybe not the supply side, or vice versa. And I think we're all in agreement that a holistic approach needs to be taken. A lot of this is going to revolve around just who's in charge next Congress, and it's probably important that we just touch on that briefly with respect to just where things stand. Over $2 billion has been spent on this election by both sides. I think if you throw in the race for Congress, you get closer to somewhere around $4 billion all in terms of campaign spending. And what that's resulted in on October 15th, roughly 3 weeks before the election, is pretty much a tie across the board. Every swing state that matters, every congressional House race that matters, every Senate race that matters, they're all inside the margin of error. And everyone has their own opinions on, their level of trust in public polling these days, after, quite a few surprises in recent years. But margins of error are important in determining the accuracy of any given poll. And when you have Trump and Harris at 47 and 49 in Nevada, or 50 and 49 in Wisconsin, what that really means in a poll with a 3% margin of error is that Trump could win by 6 points, or Harris could win that state by 6. And if we get into these, fringes of the variables, two ends of the spectrum, the outcome on election night could be wildly different. Republicans could sweep control, and in some instances, Democrats could potentially even sweep control. Leah mentioned this Texas Senate race that was not even on the radar 3 months ago that is now essentially tied. There's another one in Nebraska that was third tier status at best, and there's an independent running against an incumbent Republican, and they are essentially tied. But you have Democratic incumbents who have been leading all along, who are now tied with their opponents. So it's going to be a long election night, and really it's best to think of this as an election month, because a lot of these races aren't going to be decided for weeks afterwards. And we are very much looking down the pike to a scenario in which, similar to 2020, where Joe Biden won a handful of states by a couple 10,000 votes, 12,000 in Georgia, for example, there's going to be a lot of results probably litigated. There are going to be more than a handful of states probably decided by less than a point. There might be recounts. So we might not know fully how the dust settles until we're getting into the late November, early December timeframe. And that's whenever, policymakers will see who has the upper hand, and, how they are going to pursue their priorities in new Congress and new administration.
So, all right. So 3 questions. And thank you for all that. All right. So first question is, from the dollar amount standpoint and all the amount, spent on, these races, comparatively speaking to past years, how's this compared to past election years? Is this on par?
It's always more than the previous cycle, but this one, I think it will shatter records once again. For example, Kamala Harris became the nominee later than anyone in recent history, right? And she raised $1 billion. $1 billion. This is not the Biden campaign. She's raised $1 billion since the late summer. The Trump campaign, similarly, with including outside spending, well over $1 billion. And House races that 10 years ago may have cost each side $2 or $3 million to run a competitive race. In some of these swing districts, that they're spending $20 million on a House race. And part of that is because the political division between the electorate and the subsequent gerrymandering of congressional districts by state legislatures on both sides, but blue states and red states are both guilty of it. If they've got the power to do it, they do it. That has resulted in a fewer and fewer smaller number of competitive House races that determine control. So there are roughly 24 House races out of 435 seats that are actually considered, swing districts, gettable. To flip to the other side, we have a 4-vote margin in the House of Representatives right now with Republicans in control. Democrats need to net 4 seats. Republicans need to net 1 seat because West Virginia is already in the bag for them. And there's nothing to suggest that this won't continue for the foreseeable future in the next couple of elections, barring some, existential change in the political process.
Okay. All right. So, next question. So, and I guess it's a 2-part question. So please forgive me. First part is it quite possible that we won't know the results of this election until hypothetically Thanksgiving? In theory, if it does go until Thanksgiving, what happens between now and then to everything that's possibly pending between now, we'll say election night, and until we know who's our new president? What happens between now and then? And maybe that's a question for Leah, but what happens between now and then, right? Or between November 5th and when we know declared winner?
Yeah. Well, I do think that's a definite possibility. I've done some legal work on campaigns in the past. There's all sorts of ways that you can challenge the validity of certain things happening. And I'm sure just in this crazy election where there's been, as Zach has outlined, all sorts of, record-breaking amounts of money spent and record-breaking interest in various issues. I would, also note people like Elon Musk who have gotten really political, and there's George Soros hanging out there. It's just, it's kind of the Wild West in terms of how different things have become over the past decade or two. But the legal process is part of that. And we saw Bush v. Gore in the past and how long that took. And what I think would likely happen in DC is it would make the lame duck a lot more complicated, because a lot of people are waiting to see how the election plays out to have their lame duck strategy in terms of trying to potentially move any legislation at the end of the year. We know that the House Financial Services Chairman, Patrick McHenry, who's retiring, really would like to have a landmark piece of legislation related to crypto and is looking for opportunities there. There's also still discussion about safe banking coming into play, and interchange fees are always hanging out there as part of those types of discussions as well. But not knowing the election results makes that a lot harder, because say there was a Republican sweep, Democrats would very likely want to come to the table a little bit more, because it's going to be their last chance in a few years to pass some of their priority legislation. Same on the other side. If Donald Trump is not going to be in office, Republicans may see this as an opportunity to get things done that are not going to happen under Vice President Harris. But if we don't know the results, that's hard to navigate all of that and navigate some of the funding fights. So my prediction is probably a lot of, in that situation, uncertainty in DC, and probably not a lot getting done in terms of any major packages until there's more information available about who won the election.
Yeah, I would just add that they pushed the government funding deadline, the short-term extension, as late as possible into December. So they have until December 23rd to fund the government once again, and they have the option of doing an omnibus appropriations bill that covers everything, or a series of smaller bills that do to the same effect, or they can once again kick the can into the new Congress, which both sides, both sides will tell you in private that no one desires that, right? Because it eats into a president's first 100 days. And if the first quarter of next year is spent dealing with last year's business, whoever's president is going to be at a disadvantage during that kind of honeymoon phase. That they do have to do something by December 23rd. They also have to pass a defense bill, which will be another potential vehicle for some of these kind of sidecar packages that Leah is referencing. But again, this is all about maximum leverage. And if neither side knows what their leverage is until 2-3 weeks after the election, it makes everything more difficult.
Right. Okay. So looking at housing, right? Housing is obviously something our listeners care about a great deal. And that's what we do. The vice president election, the vice president debate, they most certainly, housing was arguably one of the topics they talked about the most. And even when we talked about, the presidential debate, housing was one of the leading questions. And so we talked about how if it's one of the lead-in questions, it tends to be a priority question. Between now and then, and I don't know their schedule, but I imagine that both Harris and Trump have some type of public appearances. Do you foresee whether this could be a question for both? That's just a question for both of you. Is housing going to continue to be in their everyday conversation? Like, is this something that you foresee them continuing to double down on as a priority? With Harris and her, tax incentives, and Trump with his, let's open up federal land and build on them, essentially. Like, is that what they're going to continue to double down on?
Yeah, I would say yes. I mean, I'll speak to the Harris side. I mean, they've been pretty consistent about raising their housing positions in most every campaign stop. It's built into the stump speech. Again, some more traditional incentive-based proposals around tax credits and innovation funds and significant spending of federal dollars to in seeking to alleviate both the affordability and the supply side of the equation. They spend a lot of focus on low income and multifamily housing as well. I'll let Leah speak to the Trump campaign. I think that they can veer off message a little more. But I would say, Tim Walz in his debate reiterated those policy positions. Again, some of them are tricky in a divided government scenario, albeit we will have a tax reform bill next year regardless. So I envision that in any scenario of party control, that Democrats will take the position of providing some sort of tax relief for first-time home buyers as one of their opening salvos in that debate. You're going to see more. We haven't really discussed this, but you'll see more discussion around the SALT repeal, state and local tax cap, which a lot of folks on both sides would like to be dealt with. But that they will go into that discussion with some of these positions. Now, in a Democratic sweep scenario, they hold on to the Senate, Harris wins, and take the House. I think all bets are off on housing in a positive way in terms of where Democratic priorities are. Right? I mean, I think you would see a significant housing stimulus bill to some effect, where we're talking in the hundreds of billions of dollars. There are pieces of legislation out there already that individuals like Chairwoman or Ranking Member, potentially soon to be Chairwoman again, Maxine Waters, have proposed over the years, which Harris was a sponsor of in the Senate, that would make significant investments across the board in the housing space, from single family to multifamily alike. So I do think that in a Democratic scenario, you're probably going to see more focus on the spending side of that equation, whereas on the Republican side, you'll see more on the regulatory delinking piece. But Leah, I'll pitch it back to you.
Yeah, exactly. Leah, thoughts on that?
Well, I will say, as someone watching the debates and listening to the news, I wish they would get more into the weeds on some of the regulatory issues on the Republican side. I think we've heard some, at times, big picture ideas that sound a little bit political to me as just the average listener, where there really are some good arguments on the regulatory side. The vice president has been in office for the past 4 years, and she's been the vice president while this administration has put out dozens and dozens of regulations that have made it harder for both lenders and housing providers. I mean, this year alone, we filed dozens of comments for our clients in the housing space and in the lending space that many of which, the whole junk fees campaign and, some of the other ideas at FHFA and other places really, I think, missed the mark on making housing more affordable and instead created some complex regulatory burdens that made it harder to operate in. I don't know that the Trump campaign has really zeroed in on that, but I do think if they were to come into leadership again, some of those conversations are happening behind the scenes. People realize that, particularly, places like the CFPB have become very political over this past administration, and maybe some pretty extreme changes are going to need to be made if they're going to reverse course on some of the work that's being done there. And I do think people are thinking ahead to that. If the Republicans win, probably in a way that they were not when Trump took over last time. He truly was a DC outsider last time. This time, he's kind of in a unique position where not only is he a little bit of an insider, but he's an insider that has had 4 years to reflect on what he might have been able to do better to change the tides at the agencies, to be more in favor of, whatever the Republican thought process is on regulation. So it will be interesting to see how that comes together, but I don't know that a lot of that has made it into the debates. I think the debates have gotten more into some of the weeds of finger pointing and back and forth that isn't talking about things like the specifics of junk fees and the specifics of some of these regulations that we've seen.
Yep. Can we pivot to the Federal Reserve and rates and the individual candidate's opinion on that? In the past, Trump has been pretty vocal on where he feels as though or thinks rates should go and what the Federal Reserve should be doing. I could be wrong, but I haven't seen him really mention much as of late. But again, I could be wrong, and I haven't really heard Harris say much about it. So knowing that mortgages and housing is very rate sensitive, depending on the election, or even as we head into that, what are they saying about rates, and what are they even talking about what rates or what they think rates should be doing, or how that even impacts housing? We'll start with Trump, since he has been the most vocal, the Trump side of the fence, since he's been the most vocal about it. Is he even still talking about what the Federal Reserve should be doing with rates?
To your point, I haven't heard as much about it in the last few weeks. They obviously had the cut a few weeks ago. We're still, I think, probably not going to totally feel the effects of that for a few more weeks. I've read that it takes a little bit of time for all of that to come into effect. But some of the discussion about it being the end of the world and things like that when it first happened, that does not seem to have come to fruition. But I do think once he potentially, if he became the president again, I'm sure would be looking at the issue in a way that would be, favorable to the economy that he would be trying to create and keep strong. And I wouldn't be super shocked if had a different take than maybe during his campaigning.
So, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, back in like 2020, he was quite vocal about where rates should go, right? And almost to the point where he would argue that he was the one who influenced the rates going down, right? Or he's the one who lowered rates if he's
That's
elected, right? Right. Thanks, Zach. If he's elected, obviously he would still want rates to go lower, right? He's very rate driven. Do you foresee him doing that, or even to that point? I mean, what Powell is still in holds that position till 26, right? Is that right? Yeah, Powell's in that. Jerome Powell's in all and there till 26. Do you see Powell leaving early if Trump's elected? If you're gambling, if you're maybe not, who knows?
I mean, this is conjecture, but I think Jerome Powell has proven to be pretty
resilient.
Resilient is right. I mean, there were periods you referenced to some degree. There were periods during the first Trump administration where the pressure was rather overt, and the tradition has dictated that presidents do not weigh in directly with pressure campaigns on the chair of the Federal Reserve. Trump was an anomaly on that, but he is not. He's not on an island, right? There are Democrats who have also called, for a lowering of rates sooner rather than the Fed did. Notably, Elizabeth Warren. This is one of those things where the political arc bends a little bit, but broadly speaking, most policymakers tend to stay out of that to the degree that both Trump and Warren have kind of tried to put their thumb on the scale. And I think that Powell has shown incredible resilience and resistance to those calls, right? If you recall, Trump wanted Powell to wait until after the election to lower rates for the first time. To your point, it's an easily digestible thing, right? When rates, when the Fed lowers rates, then, mortgage rates go down and auto loans go down, and they're to follow. And Trump wanted the credit for that. The Fed moved along anyway, right? And is now kind of forecasting, a few more quarter point cuts over the coming months. But the reason Harris hasn't discussed that is because I think that her, like Biden, that their view is that the Fed is independent and it will make decisions based off of the economic expertise of its of its institution, right? And Trump has a different viewpoint on that.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. All right, we're at time, or we're approaching time. Any final thoughts from either of you on the election and the direction that we may head into as the last couple weeks of October heading into November with regards to the election, housing, and the final weeks? We'll call it the mad dash sprint for each candidate. We'll start with Zach.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be a race to the finish, and surprise to not know the results on election night. There will be reporting in certain states that show Trump with a significant lead that may dwindle after absentee and early votes are counted. I'll use Pennsylvania as an example. There will be other states where Harris will have a lead, but the state itself is notoriously lagging in its vote counts. California being one of them, more so on the congressional level. But we will have a glimpse on election night, and if the race does go outside the margin of error on either side, then maybe we will have more certainty than we all expect. But no one should be surprised if the media is talking about this 2 weeks later because the Wisconsin results are in court, or the Pennsylvania results are in court. I expect there to be a very litigious period in the weeks to follow the November election in any scenario, and Q4 will be kind of messy on the policymaking front, but we will have a new Congress, we will have a new president. And I think if there's one thing that is certain, issues around housing policy will be front and center in this new Congress and new administration. It just may take different forms depending on who's elected.
Leah.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. There's still a lot hanging out there that really directly impacts Acuma members. There's this whole debate on title insurance that really kind of just got started, but it hasn't really gone anywhere yet. There's a lot of junk fee ideas still hanging out there at both the CFPB and the FTC. The whole 100-year review of the home loan bank system is really in the early stages of the RFI process. So there's been a lot that they've cracked the door open on, but have not necessarily finalized regulations or made changes. And the election will definitely play a role in that. Republicans, I think I saw Mark Calabria said something in the press last week, bringing up GSE reform again as a Republican priority. So really the election outcome on this industry in particular, and the timing this year, maybe even more so than in the past, things could be going in a lot of different directions, and things will probably take a little bit of time to shake out. And there could be some surprises like we've talked about before. There's been a lot of instances where people like JD Vance have agreed with Elizabeth Warren on things that surprised us. So no matter what happens, there's going to be a lot going on in this space, and we're all still going to be friends with each other no matter what happens. We're all going to have fun on election night, even if some of us are crying into our beers. But although we probably won't have the results as we've talked about, but there's going to be a lot to do and a lot of work for the movement and the credit union industry, and just looking forward to figuring all that out after the election.
Sure. I appreciate that. Now, there will be states that we will know, right? Like, no matter what, there will be I'm not going to say a handful of states, but no matter what, there will be some states that there are clear winners, right?
Yes. I mean, there will be 40 plus states that there are clear winners on election night. It's just these 7 that matter.
So you're saying it's literally going to come down to like 7 states that
7 states. It's Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, which are critical for Harris, and Georgia, North Carolina, Arizona, and Nevada, which are all critical for Trump. Trump has more avenues to victory. Harris, without Pennsylvania and Michigan, her road to the White House gets much trickier. It's just the way that these electoral votes are proportioned that are going to make for a long night. And I would venture to guess that virtually all of those 7 states fall somewhere within somewhere between half a point to 2 point, outcome across the board. So to my point about, litigious days to follow, plenty of fodder for the respective, campaigns, attorneys to litigate whatever the equivalent of the hanging Chad is in 2024.
7 states. Well, they say 7's lucky, right? Something like that.
Going to be lucky for one of them.
Lucky for one of them. Lucky for one of them. Well, Leah, Zach, thank you very much. As always, we appreciate everything that you do to support Acuma, our members. Again, your knowledge and insight into everything that's happening in DC is extremely valuable. So thank you very much for joining us today.
Thanks, Peter. Great to see you.
And to close out, thank you again to Lender Price for sponsoring our policy series. And all of you, we know your time is valuable. Thank you for tuning into the latest episode of Acuma's On Point podcast. We hope you enjoyed it. Until next time, be well, my friends.
Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time at the Acuma On Point podcast. If not already, be sure to subscribe and give us a 5-star rating. For more great episodes and information, be sure to visit us online at acuma.org. And to get the latest updates, head over to our LinkedIn page.